Welcome to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Show, where our mission is to inspire and impact other immigrant entrepreneurs. My guest today is Tony Selvaggio from eSmart Recycling. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ali. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Honored to have you as a guest. So, Tony,
I'm an immigrant. I qualify.
Absolutely. You're an immigrant. That's what I was going to ask you. So, obviously you're an immigrant entrepreneur, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So tell us where you're from, and obviously we both are in the US, but tell us where you're from and how you ended up in the US.
Man, so I was born and raised in Venezuela, and I came here April 10 of 2011, and I came on a work visa, and I didn't even know where Tampa was on the map when I came. And I had been to the United States before, like to Disney and Miami, and we had some friends of the family, and that's why we came here. And so from 2011, brand new country, typical immigrant story, you know. I think we all have a very similar story. I think that's that part of the fabric of the immigrant that unites us. It's something that we can all relate to, what it's like to just go to a different place that you don't know absolutely nothing about and start from zero, and you're okay with it, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So did you had anyone in the US, or did you just decided on your own to come to the US and start working here?
So we had some friends of the family that had started a business here, and the guy had happened to land in Tampa, but he lived closer to Sarasota. And then when we were spending some holidays together, his family was still very young. He wanted to get out of the country. Venezuela had become a very messy country, and he just wanted a better future for his family. And at that time, I was graduating college, and I knew how to speak English. And he said, "Hey, if I sponsor your visa, would you come and would you help me kind of put together something similar to what he had with his family in Venezuela, what was related to scrap metal? You know, they were in the scrap metal business." So I said, yeah, for sure. And that's kind of how the whole journey began. I was supposed to be living closer to him because it's the only person that I kind of knew. They were friends with my mom and dad, not with me, obviously. And when I made that commute, like the first day to Tampa, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I gotta live in Tampa. This is crazy. So I ended up living in a little suburb of Tampa called Brandon.
Mm-hmm. I know Brandon.
And that was the first time, the little first apartment that I ever rented was there, and the rest is history. You know, that's our warehouse is there. I've always kind of worked in the same Riverview, Tampa, Brandon area, and then, unbeknownst to how we think the story is gonna go, this just became home.
Right,
It's been home.
So don't tell us about the warehouse and everything. We will get there soon.
Yeah.
Okay. But so what was the first job? You got here and then your family friend asked you to work for him. What was the first job that you got yourself into?
So we were buying junk cars, right? And we were stripping the parts and we were recycling the parts. And the way that the model works is that if you get a junk car, you know, for us might be junk, but the motor, the engine, the transmission, some parts might still be valuable in secondary markets. And these secondary markets for us was Latin America. So we would take the cars in, we would strip the parts that we knew we could export and sell as used parts, and then the rest we would sell it as scrap. And that was my gig. I was in charge of buying, selling, managing the whole scrapyard, if you will. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But that was my first experience, was those, 60 hours a week in the sun, taking parts out of cars. And I was not necessarily doing it. I was not the person doing it, but you're involved in the whole process from beginning to end.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I did for a good year and a half.
Okay, and then what happened from there?
Well, one of the main reasons is that the company that hired me, the guy was here on an investor visa.
I'm here on an investor visa.
Right, so his
Yeah.
investor visa got denied,
Mm.
which is ironic because my work visa was to work in his company.
Right.
And it shines a light of what can happen in the whole system and attorneys and how the cases are presented. It just didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I had an opportunity, and I became a scrap metal buyer for another company here.
Mm.
And the whole process was just crazy how it happened.
So I have a question right there. So
Yeah.
his visa got denied. That means he was rejected and he had to go back to.
Right. And then he closed the company, carried on. I think he's in the Dominican Republic now.
Okay. And then you moved on with a different company,
Right.
basically now using what you had experienced, but in a little slightly different industry. Is that correct?
Right, because now I was in the buying side.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I used to be the company that was producing the scrap, and we had to find buyers for that scrap. And now I was on the buyer side.
Mm-hmm.
Now I understood how the relationships happen from the scrap metal side with the smelters and the shredders, and at a higher level, right? Because it's a very complex supply chain. So that's what I did for another year and a half.
Okay. So let's just pause here for a second.
Yeah.
What was it? I would like to know, what was it like when you moved to the US? You had been here before on vacation, traveling back and forth, but when you moved here to live now in the US, obviously in Florida we have a huge Latino community which basically helps with being from Venezuela and getting connected. But what was life like when you got here and you lived here?
Yeah, it was a culture shock. It was one culture shock after another culture shock because I came here on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an only child. My mom.
Oh, you're the only child.
Yeah, I'm an only child. So my mom helped me. I remember that first trip, and she kind of helped me get set up. And then she went, she stayed for like 3 or 4 days. And then when she left, it was the first time. I was like 24, I think, at that time. It was the first time that I was away from home, away from family, away from everything, right? So then when you're left to fend, by yourself, then you just get a different level of maturity that comes with the whole process of being an immigrant. Because even here, when mom is 2 hours away, dad, sister, childhood friends, work friends, co-workers, things that they're always close by, but to just remove yourself from all of that and just put yourself in a place where you literally don't know a single person. It's something that we all go through. So then learning how to navigate everything and learning how to navigate life. And for me, I came here in 2011, and in 2014 I started my company, which was crazy, stupid idea, right? Because I'm still learning how everything worked.
Right.
It was a very expensive. I've gone through a very expensive learning curve, but you figure it out, and the community was amazing, so it made it even easier, right?
So what was the company that you started back then?
So back then, when I started my company, I thought that we could be sort of like a mobile scrapyard, right?
Based on the knowledge you had, based on the experience you have had before.
And based on the budget that I had and the capital that I had to start. And I was...
When you say, sorry to interrupt you, but when you say based on the budget and capital I had, was everything self-funded and bootstrapped basically from what you had saved?
I mean, that's one way of saying it. So what happened was that at that time, one of the catalysts that kind of made me quit my job and start my own company in 2014 was that things were getting tougher and tougher in Venezuela, right? Because you knew that Venezuela was going through rough times, but you never imagined that it was going to be what it ended up being right now. And that, I think that's a key aspect of the Venezuelan immigrant is that we never thought we were going to have to leave our countries, right? It's you don't think about that when you're growing up. And then when this whole regime started, that was everything that you thought about was, how am I going to get the heck out? And so when we came, so when I came 2011, 2014, that whole environment was there, and it kept getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So in 2014, I started talking to some friends. My close friends were talking to other friends, and we kind of sort of pulled together. Maybe we can get together like around $100,000, $150,000 from people that want to get their money out of the country and they have no idea where to put it.
Back there from people in Venezuela.
Right, from friends and people that is like, what's Tony doing there? Well, he's like doing something in scrap metal. Maybe we can, do something. I remember February of 2014, we went through a major devaluation of the currency in Venezuela. Right. And it happened like overnight.
Right.
It's one of those things that for some reason there was this protest that started with one student and now like half of the country is in a protest. And I remember it was sort of the beginning of the decline because it was right after Chavez had passed away, right? So it was a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of the people, they just didn't want to get rid of their money. Because now everything that you have saved is basically whatever dollars that you have. And at that time, I had already quit my job, and my mom and my dad were like, we only have like $8,000. And they had like a car here that they had left. So I sold that car. And I only had $8,000 to start. And with $8,000, there's only so many things that you can do. And the idea of starting with the scrapyard that kind of led for me to quit my job, then it had to be reduced to, I only have $8,000. How am I going to make money with that, right? And that's kind of how the whole thing started.
So was that $8,000 the starting capital for your business, or was it also combined with the money that you could get together from friends back home in Venezuela?
No, so at the end, nobody had any money to invest.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you ended up basically with this $8,000.
It's the only thing I had.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was the only thing I had, and then I had the opportunity to sell like an old like Corolla that we had that was like 5 years old, and then I think I sold that for like another $8,000, and that was like my second, my second round of funding.
Right. So at that time, had you already invested the first $8,000 in your business, and then you sold the car and also got some cash from that?
I had no idea what I was doing. So a part of me said, I need a truck, was one of the first things that kind of came through my mind. I need a truck because with a truck is how you can start. Worst case scenario, it can always be like a junk removal company.
Right.
Because then I can charge to get the things out, and then I can scrap the rest and get some money from this. I knew, I trusted in myself enough to know that I would figure it out, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. And then some friends that I had met through my scrap metal industry introduced me to the idea of computers and recycling computers. And one guy was sort of doing it on the side, because he said people don't know what to do with all this stuff. And I put a couple of ads here, and then this lady called me, and she had like 100 computers, and the only thing that I did was I connected her with this guy that buys computers for scrap, and I made some money. So maybe you should look into that. I'm like, that's interesting, because I started looking at the model, right, and how the electronic waste industry works, because it's a whole industry within the recycling industry. It's a sub-industry that only deals with e-waste. And it became super interesting. So I tell this guy, and I'm like, okay, so how do you recycle computers? Mind you, at this point, 2015, I have an old truck, right, because at this point, it's the only thing I have, and a little trailer where I'm saving some of the stuff that I'm accumulating. I didn't have any business model, like poorly planning, like horrible. So at this point, I hear about these computers, and one of the things that catches my attention is that you have the opportunity to get inventory at little to no cost, because people have no idea what to do with it. So then he would say, just go to places, networking events, and ask, hey, do you have any old computers? Do you know how to get rid of them? I can help you. And I started doing that. And I always tell this story because it was one of my biggest culture shocks. Was when this one day I learned about this nonprofit who doesn't have any computers. And they wanted to figure out a way if they could buy some affordable computers from me. And I remember that when I was getting those calls from random people and I had to go and pick up 10 computers, 5 computers, whatever it is, those computers were still fairly new, right? And that's one thing that really caught my attention was like, I can't believe these people are getting rid of all of this stuff. This is pretty new. Like, we come from countries where you don't just throw away things that are working. Like, that's such a... this is the only country where you just throw away things that are just working because there's something better. I mean, maybe now in Venezuela right now, maybe it's like that. I don't know. I haven't been there in a while, but it sure wasn't like that when I was growing up, right? You get rid of the computer. I mean, worst case, that thing is like, it's a door stopper. Right. Before it gets thrown away. So here I was seeing that everybody was throwing away these things that were new, that were working. So I knew that I could scrap them and make money out of them, but it just didn't make sense to scrap because there was still value in them. So then this nonprofit, I noticed that they don't have any computers. They have such a powerful story. They're doing these amazing things. And when she's telling me everything that they do, and I see that there's such a gap, such a disconnect between the work that's being done in the community versus the reality that we see in corporate America, for example, versus the reality that we see in how public offices manage budgets. Right. And then you see that, and then you just go 5 miles down the street and you see this nonprofit that's been working in the community for 20 years, that's a lifeline to resources for people here, and they don't even have computers. And you're like, this is mind-blowing because this is America. Like, this shouldn't exist. It doesn't. I don't understand how this exists, because when I was growing up, America was like, it's a dreamland. It's the best country in the world, and then we get to experience it, and we are like, yes, it is the best country in the world, but how does that exist? So then I experienced it with computers, right, and access to technology, and then we had the opportunity to, after hearing that story, the natural thing for me to do is I have to grab some of the computers that we have that we're not doing anything with, that probably we're going to end up scrapping them for $5 a piece, and give those computers to these guys so they can use it way better, because now you're giving an opportunity for kids to do their homework, for parents to apply for jobs, to pay their bills. Right. So for me, it was just a no-brainer.
Okay, so can you educate me on how you make money on, let's put the nonprofit support on the side for a second, but how a recycling company that recycles, let's say, e-waste in general, but also computers, how does this model look like? How do you make money from recycling computers?
Right. So So when we started figuring out that there was this gap in the community, we said, well, you keep seeing the gap because the only way that we have solved this gap is because at some point there's an altruistic approach to it. Someone hears about it, they understand the importance of these organizations and what they do, they support it, and that's kind of how the philanthropy model works, right? And for me, that was very unfair, because these guys don't understand how the philanthropy model works. They're just hustling in the community. Right. So then I said, well, what if we could figure out a way where we could translate this support into terms that corporate partners could understand? So how can we utilize this to turn these old computers into just an excuse to support the community? So then the way that we make it happen in a sustainable way is that by us eliminating acquisition costs of the hardware, that's the money that we have as a revenue, increase. That's the margin. So when we make money out of the computers that we get, we about 30% is what we allocate back into the refurbishing of devices. Right? So when you're working with these massive companies that have already depreciated their assets so much, whatever symbolic value that you can give any of them for the hardware that they're getting rid of means nothing to them. So what we're doing is that we're demonstrating that at an operational level, we can compete with virtually anyone because the model is pretty standard. It's logistics and trucks, and you bring them to the warehouse, and you inventory and audit them and provide certificates of data destruction. Every reputable company does that. But where we differentiate is that because we can measure how much money we're making, we also have very, very strong partnerships with folks in the community who are trying to figure out how to bridge the digital divide, who are desperately needing computers. So then we connect everyone in the whole mechanism, right? And then we can say to one of our corporate partners, hey, because you recycle with us this whole year, this is how much you recycle, this is your environmental footprint, and this is how many devices we were able to refurbish on your behalf that went to this organization, and that's what we call the social impact metric. And then we package it, and we present it in the form of an environmental and a social impact report. And now we're giving them data that they're using at their environmental sustainability governance goals. So it shows how they're being even more sustainable about their approaches just by being more mindful on how they use as a vendor, right? Because you're working with a vendor that has decided to take a commitment to figuring out a problem the community has. Is your other vendor doing the same? No. Then maybe this would be a good reason for you to consider another vendor, right? If you really want to be part of this. If you don't really care, it's not part of your scope, then that's fine. But we're realizing that a lot of companies really do care, really want to think outside of the box. Yeah.
So I have a few questions. Let's start with the one that I have about first thing that comes to mind is when you give computers away from this, or when they give it to you from all these companies, let's say corporate America. Now my brain would go, okay, what happens if there is data on the computer, and because that's the thing that I would worry about if I would want to recycle a computer. Am I making sure everything is removed, everything is deleted? Maybe what if something is left? So how do you guys handle that part of the business?
Yeah, and that's a very good question because that's one of the most complex parts of the company. I mean, we exist as an industry because of that specific need, right? Specifically to address the need of data security, even more than environmental compliance. It's because massive companies have that question, and we need to provide a very visual chain of custody of what happens with the devices from the moment they come into the warehouse to the moment they are recycled or repurposed or refurbished, right? So we have an entire system that takes care of that. Every hard drive, every media, every data containing device is either shredded or wiped. So when if we reuse the same computers that we're probably getting from a corporate partner, if we reuse them, and sometimes we don't, sometimes we sell them, and with the money we buy standardized equipment, and that's the equipment that we deploy, right? But if we use them, they all go through a data sanitization process. We install a new hard drive, we install a new SSD, new operating system, so everything is it's officially refurbished.
Okay, gotcha. And was there in the beginning a process, or let's say when you have a new partner that is coming to you guys and recycling their computers with you, is there a process that you have to go through to basically get approved to work with them?
It depends on the complexity of the requirement,
Right.
and that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry, right? Is that depending on the person, there's different priorities and
Right.
needs. One of the things that happens with e-waste in particular is that the recycling rates are very low, and that worries a lot because they're volume wise it doesn't represent that much, but toxicity wise it represents a lot. So when you look at the numbers at our landfills, for example, electronics and e-waste probably represent maybe between 2 and 5% of the volume. Not that much, but they represent almost 80% of the toxics that are in that waste.
I see.
Right? And it happens very similar when those electronics end up in waste to energy plants, because then they get incinerated, right? Or they get dumped, they end up finding their waste into the water. So from a pollution standpoint, e-waste is a big red flag that we have in our near future. So that in itself is important, right? But then from the other side is the understanding that data is so important as well, and data protection. So.
Gotcha. Okay, so thanks for the education. I think I have a better picture now of what it looks like, what the business model also looks like, and the process. So okay, let's go back to building the company and the business that you were bootstrapping, so to say. Okay, so and then what happened from there when you started now seeing the niche and the need for what you were doing, and how did things move from there?
It's been a process of evolution, right? It's been me coping with not only the idea of how to conceptualize a business model, but also, learn how to run a business, learn how to manage a team, learn how to get a grip on my processes. It's because you bootstrap, you just know what you know, and sometimes you realize that you are the one that's blocking the entire team. So learning how to recognize that, and some people take longer, some people take a faster route. But for us, it's been a pretty fun journey because we're trying to figure it out. I think that I would say the business model started taking shape, I would say around 2016, 17, 18, 19 is conceptualizing it and figuring out how to make money and getting credit, because I didn't even have credit as and it wasn't even a resident right at that point.
Oh wow.
So then the business didn't have any credit either. So then imagine how challenging it was to get that first truck, to get that first forklift. So that initial climb of growth was very, very hard. Because it was funded by credit cards, it was funded by the same money that was coming in. And then COVID happened, and everyone understood that this was a problem. Access to technology was a problem. So the value proposition that we had always had as a company was sort of the one that prevailed. And after, 2022, 2023 have been years where we have been able to put a lot of pilots, to the test and really figure out how this model works. And it's been pretty fun. Yeah, figuring it out.
So I assume you also went through challenges, while building the company, bootstrapping and everything. What was it that kept you going through all these challenges and all these obstacles? What was it that kept you motivated, and you kept the fire in you and motivated you to just move on and to just go, and regardless of the challenges you faced, you just keep pushing through?
Man, I think we go through different periods of motivation, right? I think our motivation takes different shapes, and it's, for me, it's crazy because you don't really know when you're going through a defining period in your life until it has happened. And then you look back and you're like, oh, that's when it happened.
Then you connect the dots.
Right. That's Steve Jobs, right? So I just a lot of I think I've always felt something inside of me that has told me that that I can do anything that I want. Right? It's like the seed that's planted on you, probably by your parents, probably by positive reinforcement, probably by the right environment, probably by the same struggles that you see every day when you're growing up, and then I've always felt like I wanted to do something more. I wanted to do something bigger. And I never saw myself in the squares that are provided to you by society from the standpoint of a job, from the standpoint of but it's because my environment didn't allow me the opportunity to see it. Because I never really understood what scale was until I came to the United States. And for me, I've always said, like, I don't know if it happened to you when you were growing up, but for us, I was always hustling.
Right.
I was always trying to resell something.
Right. Yeah, I can relate to that.
I was always like figuring out, so what do you do? You stainless steel. Can I buy some from you and sell it over there? And just silly ways to hustle because it's what you see and what you know. And when you have that instinctive nature of seeing the world like that, and they take you from a place like Venezuela and they put you in an economic system like the United States, you see opportunity everywhere. So it's impossible not to be ambitious when you see so many different angles, so many different gaps. But that becomes so overwhelming too, because you're like, where do I start? You know, how do you hone into understanding what's the first step and what's the second step? Even the whole concept, Ali, of knowing that we're only really good at one, maybe if you're lucky, two things, and the rest you just have to delegate and build a team around. I remember hearing that in 2014. You know, I remember reading about it when I started my company. I remember seeing people talk about it, but you don't really know what that means until you start to really try to figure it out.
Right. So when you say you've been hearing that, you know, I believe we entrepreneurs also have people that inspire us through the journey and through our life as an entrepreneur. Did you have people that maybe you connected with and you had some sorts of relationship with that inspired you in one way or another, or maybe even people that you didn't have a relationship with, but they were some sorts of inspiration to you?
I think that I think I'm blessed because I usually see every interaction, every opportunity to meet someone as a way to learn, right? And I think that we have so many mentors in our life, and it's our decision how we take that learning. You know, do we want to take it gracefully or grudgingly? And for me, I think I have learned to see, or at least try to see, you know, everything that comes at me as, you know, it's always good, right? That it's always good. It's just bring it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? That attitude towards life and towards people, I think it's helped me a lot because there's so many folks that I've met along the way, so many, that it's impossible to do it alone. And when we get so fixated with the journey of one individual person, sometimes we forget to see all the context that was so important for them to arrive to that spot, that even the advice, even well-intended advice that can come from that person is always going to be biased because it's going to be very related to their own experiences. and just having the ability to just take it all in and to shape as I go and to discover myself as I go. I've been trying to just understand what it means to enjoy the journey, right? And just one, like every little stage, every little obstacle that comes, see it like that. And I see it from the people that I meet. I have so many great mentors that I've met here in the community that I can reach out to. And maybe I met through various different groups, but just knowing that they're there, right? I think it's what I value when I see the opportunity to not necessarily follow the path of someone, but understand that if I'm present and I try to understand what gaps I really, really want to solve right now, then I can find out who can potentially help me do that. And just reach out to that person for that specific problem, right?
And obviously, you know, it's very helpful with your personality and who you are and the way you interact with people, but also with what you do, you know, what your project is about and what your business is about and the impact that you're having on the on the world and on the community, as you say. You know, I believe people are way more willing to help and support if a project is like yours and, you know, they know they're making an impact.
Right.
So I believe that's obviously very helpful with what you do. So okay, let's go back. You know, when I was looking your social media, your Instagram channel, there is so many great things that you have done, and you've been awarded so many times. But there is one specific project that I want to talk about. You're now a Apple partner, and obviously is something to be really proud of. I believe there are only 12 companies nationwide that are Apple partners in the field that you are. So tell us more about that, how it happened, and what exactly happened.
For sure. So Apple has this thing called the Apple Impact Accelerator, right? And the Apple Impact Accelerator is it's one of their initiatives under a bigger umbrella, push to become carbon neutral by 2030, which is a very ambitious goal because they look at sustainability not only from the standpoint of resources that they use in the manufacturing of their products, but also best practices across the supply chain. And it's very interesting because you have someone like Apple that doesn't have to do this, but they understand the importance of doing it because of the responsibility that they have as a company. And when you see organizations like that are pushing the standards constantly, that know that people have an intrinsic motivation to push those standards, knowing that they're going to potentially receive contracts from, a $1 trillion company, then that's the capitalist system working at its best. And with the Apple Impact Accelerator, what they do is that they try to identify companies across the country that align with some of their pillars that they're trying to achieve as part of this initiative. So this is the third time that they've done it. It's the third consecutive year. They only select between 10 and 12 folks every year. And then this year we had the opportunity to be selected there. So now we are an alumni of the program. And it was amazing. It's a program that basically teaches you how a company like Apple works in terms of this is what's important for us from a supply chain perspective, from a social responsibility perspective, from an equity and justice perspective. And this is our own version, and this is what we're putting out there. And we basically want to recruit companies that align with us. And that for me was so eye-opening, because I've always thought that one of the biggest walls that I always encounter is that it's very difficult for people to understand that with existing in this world, there's a toll, right? When you consume, there's a toll because you're taking more than you're giving in the general ecosystem. And people say, well, wait a minute, I am not, because I'm paying for these products and services. And they're right. So by the very way the system works, I feel like there's a bigger responsibility that falls in the shoulders of businesses, right? Across the supply chain, from the ones that are producing to the ones that are servicing the end consumer. And if we all collectively shared that responsibility, then it wouldn't be a difficult burden. And the case in point is the computers. If you have roughly in this county around just like 15,000 families that don't have access to computers or technology, it doesn't sound like a lot in comparison to the size of the county.
All right.
But why? Like, look at the multiplier effect of those 15,000 people who don't have access to something as basic that we need right now in the world as access to a computer and internet, when the entire world revolves around you having access to a Gmail account, an email account. So it doesn't make sense that gap exists, right? And that's just like a microcosm of a general overview of the world. And it's like, if we just shared a little bit of that responsibility, then we would educate, we would create better consumers, and then our race would be who can create better, more educated consumers faster, instead of being who can create dumber and stupider consumers faster. Because there's only two ways, and one is sustainable, the other one's not.
Right.
You don't have to be Einstein to realize that one path is just chaos and destruction, and the other path is a more collaborative, successful, thriving environment. And I think Tampa understands that. I think that's one of the reasons why Tampa is so successful and the ecosystem is so successful, because we're good at understanding that. And that's why when you go out into the community and when you participate in all these programs and community-related initiatives and accelerators and incubators, and if you just have an idea and you want everybody to become better, you're one of us, right?
And I also believe it so much reflects like what you do. It pretty much also reflects what you just said and described, because, you know, when we talk about business and entrepreneurship, oftentimes people perceive it as, okay, I have to be a hard negotiator, I have to win, so for me to win, someone else needs to lose, and which is nonsense, you know. I believe we're living in a world that is abundant, that everybody can win, and there is enough for everybody to eat, you know. If more people would think the way that you think, and also not think only, but also operate, right?
Well, and that's why it's refreshing when you see companies like Apple putting together these programs that are kind of pushing the limits on what supplier compliance should look like, because then other companies start to pay attention and do the same, and do the same and do the same. And when you ask me, like, I didn't know that this whole journey of entrepreneurship for me here in 2014 when I started it, I didn't know that it was going to be such a like a personal journey for me, because it has become like my own personal journey of growth. And as I understand better as a person, I look at my company, and my company does the same thing. And it's this thing that is encouraging when you see it happening. And when you see it, and that's bringing it back to why I think it's important that when you see companies that are focused on that, then it makes you understand that this is where we're heading, this is where we're going. So it's encouraging. I see it as an opportunity to understand that this is probably not just a fad or a movement. This is a collective understanding that because of all the knowledge and access to information that's out there, now we're starting to kind of understand that, you know what, we are kind of better when we work together,
right,
than when we work against each other.
And I also believe, the consumer these days, as you just said, has access to knowledge and information, and they, businesses cannot just screw them and take whatever for granted and just take advantage of the consumers. The consumers have access, and they know what's going on, And of course, if you're here for some overnight success which doesn't exist, in my opinion, and you just want to suck out everything from the consumers, if that's the goal, then you might get one thing or something else out of it. But long-term, sustainable, successful businesses, I believe there is only one way to it. And that's the way that you just described. There is no other way to be long-term successful and have raving fans that are not just consumers, but they're really behind your brand and behind your business and are supporting you. I believe that's the only way to go.
Yeah, I thank you for that validation, and like I said, it's encouraging to see more people think along the same ways, because it just shows that we're thinking more in how we're collaborating, that we're thinking more in how we're creating new business models, now we're thinking more in how we're consuming information and content. So I just think it's also a great opportunity for every business to align themselves with a cause that not only is very important to them or very important to the team, but it's like you said, we just saw that there was something was happening that we felt that it was just unjust, unfair. And that's it. And we just try to came up with a solution of something that shouldn't be there. So if you think in your day-to-day interactions that there are things that are unjust and unfair, we're in the best country where you can potentially create a business model around it.
Exactly.
And that's it. And then you let the market do the rest.
Absolutely. I also see a lot of people that complain about things their entire life and don't do anything about it. But there are other people like yourself, they see some things that needs fixing, and then they go fix it. Right. And they make a business model out of it. Right. And now everybody wins. So something that I wanted to touch on is when I look at your social profiles, I see a lot of projects that children are involved, that you're also giving back and supporting children. Tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, so most of the outreach that we do when it comes to access to technology is somehow related to kids and schools. That's almost, I would say, 90% of all of our efforts are probably going to that. The way that we've kind of worked around it is that if you're a nonprofit and some of your work is around digital inclusion, digital equity, access to devices, access to technology, and there's quite a few right now. There's quite a few because there's been federal acts and a lot of money coming from the federal government that is kind of aimed at trying to solve that problem. So you have a lot of organizations that are doing cool things and a lot of organizations that figure out a way how to get a quick check and then they're just doing it. And they're not really going beyond, checking a few lists and then can I get a grant? Yes, you're good. And so there's quite a few organizations out there. And what we're doing is that we're partnering with them in the community. So we're creating very strong partnerships and we're telling them, if one of your areas of focus is access to technology, then by default, access to hardware is one of your issues. It has to be, right? So then we will provide the hardware. And what we need in return is the data of what's happening with the hardware. And when we start to figure out exactly where these devices are going and how they're bridging a gap, then we can measure it. Then that's what we're looking at, creating a more unifying way of delivering technology to the community, right? But when we're partnering with all of these organizations that are working in the community, most of them, in one way, shape, or form, are connected to the school district, which is also an interesting model because you don't want to duplicate efforts,
right?
And I think as you start to chip away, and you get to the point and you say, what's the next roadblock that we have in the model? Oh, well, how do you know that you're not duplicating efforts? And how do you know that you're not giving computers to a group through this organization and then also through this organization? So then, okay, so we need to create a unifying way that we can all communicate. So then we're creating that unifying way for the sake of the model. We don't know what that's going to turn into in the next 5 years. It sounds pretty fun.
Right.
Just the ability to be talking to people that were not talking to each other and putting everybody under a single goal and mission. It's fun in its own right, because now you're going from committees and boards that talk about the issue and they come up with solutions, but no one executes on the solution, to an actual group of people that, okay, now we all have a role. Now we're going out in this community and let's make it happen. So that's pretty fun. Yeah.
One thing that I'm really seeing and I really love about what you do is also you're seeing, I don't know if you would call it signs that you're seeing across the line, but you're seeing opportunities, and then you're also, at the same time, you're also seeing, okay, where can I have an impact? Where can I make an impact? Where can I change lives for the better? Where can I give back? So that's something that I really love about what you do and admire you for it.
Appreciate that, Ali.
And I do believe that when we're in the zone, like when we're really dialed in what we do, then things like this happen, because you really dialed in and you really are 100% in what you're doing. So I also saw another video about Stanford University. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Stanford University has a program that is put together by the Latino Business Action Network, LBAN. Awesome organization. It's one of the leading organizations in the country that is looking at, again, compiling data from the Hispanic consumers, the Hispanic business owners. They're the ones that go through the data and statistics, and like there's this crazy statistic about Hispanic business owners that I love sharing every time I have an opportunity, because it's crazy. Again, it's one of those things that you're like, this doesn't make any sense. So we have about $2 trillion of purchasing power in the United States every year, and guess what percentage of Hispanic business owners in the country have businesses of more than $1 million?
What percentage
of Hispanic businesses in the country make more than $1 million?
I have no idea.
1%.
Wow.
1%.
That's mind blowing.
It's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy. So then you start to talk about Latinos, right, in the communities. Like, man, we don't have representation. We don't have people, understanding our power, our struggles and talking for us. There's no money. There's no money. So folks like Alban, then addressing that issue, partner with Stanford, right? And they created the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. So the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, they do 2 classes every year, and you have to apply for the classes. And then you're put in this group with other 70 business from around the country. And there's a criteria that you have to meet, and there's interviews and stuff that you have to go through to qualify. And then if you make it, they invite you to do an accelerator course and help you hone in your business, to help you grow it and identify what's happening that's not letting you explode. And how do we figure it out? And then you're in a room with other very successful Hispanic business owners from all over the country that they've sort of navigated that too, but they're in different stages of growth. I felt like we were the tiniest one.
Right.
So then again, similar to the other, you're an alumni now, so you're part of a network, and the goal is to keep growing the network,
right?
Because it's a no-brainer,
right?
And the more you get spread out, the better. And so if you're listening to this and you're a Latino entrepreneur, go figure that out. Go check out all the resources that are in the community. I'm telling you, we have to appreciate the fact that not a lot of communities have all of the resources that we have in the Tampa Bay community. We have the Small Business Development Center. We have the Entrepreneur Collaborative Center. We have the Chambers of Commerce, the Hispanic, the Latin Chamber. We have Prospera. We have, like, whatever you are, there's an organization here that can help you, and it's not going to cost you anything. Just reach out, ask for help.
Thanks for letting them know.
For sure.
So Tony, I know you're a busy guy. When I was talking to, or when I was emailing with your assistant and your team, I was like, okay, Tony is a busy guy. I don't want to, everything has to be. So I'm really grateful for you, and I don't want to take your time much longer. But before we wrap up, I do have a few final questions. Going through everything that you went through, from coming here and then starting your, doing jobs and then starting your own business out, and today being obviously the heart-centered entrepreneur that you are, and making all the impact that you're making, what advice would you give your younger self who came to the US in 2011? Had no clue about what he's gonna do, had no idea about what business he was going to start. With all the things that you know today, what advice would you give that young Tony?
I would say trust in yourself a little bit more and plan. It's hard. It's hard to take out that piece of paper and that pen and write down what's your goal for the year. Write down, how is this going to work? Just map it out. It's hard to do. And it's even harder if you're doing it by yourself. But I know that if I would have done that, it would have saved me a lot of time and money. Because you don't understand the importance of it until you get to the point where you realize that if you don't do that, there's no way that you can grow. Because you're going to have a frustrated team, you're going to have a frustrated life. You can't. So understanding that probably sooner, and it's just trusting myself. We all gotta trust in our, what's in here.
And thank you for that. And what would you say is the biggest lesson that you have learned along these years being an immigrant entrepreneur? What was if you would pick one big lesson, what was the biggest lesson that you have learned? Also in life, but also in your entrepreneurial journey.
Right. I think there are so many lessons, right? So many lessons. Right now, for some reason, the one that's coming to me in this moment is perspective. It's just perspective. The same thing. Nothing changes. The only thing that changes is how you look at it. And it's everything for me is just perspective change. And I'm blessed. I'm happy that I have a healthy life and my kids and everything. So it's easier to preach about perspective when you're preaching from a position of comfort.
Right.
But it's also, it's the biggest factor in whether you want to have a great day or a bad day is how you're going to look at the day. It's up to you. You can be very miserable about your day or very happy.
That's so true.
Right.
That's so true. 100%. So, Tony, before we wrap up, where do people find you? Obviously, we're going to link all the social media in the show notes, but also, tell people where they can find and connect with you.
If you just go to our website, www.esmartrecycling.com. We have an amazing team working in the background, taking care of business. They're there answering questions. It's one thing that we have as a culture is that we're it's bigger than ourselves. And yeah, if you hit us up on Instagram, on Facebook, on any of the social medias, someone will be there to help out. But just go to our website and all of the info that you need is right there.
Thank you. So, Tony, thank you so much for being here and making an impact on other immigrant entrepreneurs by sharing your story and inspiring them to do what they do. And I respect you a lot and I admire you for what you do. And thanks for taking the time and coming here.
Thank you. Thank you for creating this, an immigrant yourself, just going into the community and getting at it. This is what we need. So thank you for the platform and thank you for the invite.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.